The sound of hooves thundering across hard-packed earth shattered the desert silence, and Yates Crawford knew without looking that whoever rode those horses meant trouble for someone. He stood on the rocky outcrop overlooking the narrow canyon pass, his eyes narrowing against the harsh Nevada sun as he watched 4 riders drag something behind the lead horse. His massive frame tensed when he realized it was not something, but someone, a figure stumbling and falling, being yanked forward by a rope. The dust cloud they kicked up made it hard to see details, but Yates had lived in these mountains long enough to recognize the cruelty in the way they moved. They were not just traveling, they were punishing. Yates descended from his vantage point with the practiced ease of a man who had spent the better part of 8 years navigating these treacherous slopes. His long, dark hair, streaked with sun-bleached strands, fell past his shoulders as he moved. The buckskin shirt stretched across his broad chest, and muscular arms bore the stains of mountain living, and his hands, calloused and strong, gripped his rifle with familiar comfort. At 26, he had left civilization behind after the war, preferring the honest brutality of nature to the corruption he had witnessed among men. But even out here, more than a day's ride from Winnemucca, he could not escape the darkness that humans carried with them. The riders stopped in a clearing below, and Yates crept closer through the sagebrush and juniper trees that dotted the landscape. He could hear them now, rough voices arguing about something. One man dismounted and walked back to the figure on the ground, kicking at it with his boot. A woman's cry pierced the air, and Yates felt his jaw clench. He counted 4 men, all armed, all laughing as they passed a bottle between them. The woman lay in the dirt where she had fallen, her wrists bound in front of her, her dress torn and filthy. "Should have kept your mouth shut about what you saw," one of the men said, spitting tobacco juice onto the ground near her head. "Now we got to take you all the way out here and make sure you do not talk to nobody." "Please," the woman said, her voice hoarse but defiant. "You cannot just leave me out here to die. There is nothing for miles." "That is the point, sweetheart," another man said, and they all laughed again. Yates had seen enough. He positioned himself behind a large boulder, using the terrain to his advantage. 4 against 1 were not odds he particularly liked, but he had faced worse during the war. These men were drunk and careless, which gave him an edge. He also had something they did not have, the element of surprise and intimate knowledge of every rock and ravine in this area. He fired a shot into the air, the crack of the rifle echoing off the canyon walls. The men scrambled, reaching for their weapons, spinning in circles trying to locate the shooter. "Next one will not be a warning," Yates called out, his deep voice carrying authority. "Let the woman go and ride out of here." "Who the hell are you?" the apparent leader shouted, a barrel-chested man with a thick beard. "Someone who does not care for the odds here," Yates replied. 4 men against 1 tied-up woman. That does not sit right." "This is not your business, mountain man. This woman stole from Mr. Garrett in Winnemucca. We are just delivering justice." Yates could see the woman shaking her head, trying to speak, but one of the men grabbed her by the hair and yanked her head back. Something hot and fierce ignited in Yates's chest. He aimed carefully and fired, the bullet striking the dirt inches from the man's boot. The man yelped and jumped back, releasing the woman. "I said let her go," Yates repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. The men exchanged glances, weighing their options. They were drunk but not stupid enough to charge blindly toward a shooter with high ground. The leader finally spat on the ground and nodded to his men. "Cut her loose," he ordered. "But boss, Mr. Garrett said—" "I said cut her loose. We will tell Garrett she died out here. No one is going to find her anyway." One of the men approached the woman with a knife, but instead of cutting the ropes around her wrists, he cut the rope tethering her to the horse. He shoved her hard, and she fell onto her side. The men mounted up, firing shots wildly toward where they thought Yates might be, but he had already moved to a different position. They rode off at a gallop, their laughter fading into the distance. Yates waited a full 10 minutes, making sure they were truly gone and not circling back. The woman remained where she had fallen, breathing hard, her body shaking. When he was satisfied the men had continued west, he made his way down to the clearing, approaching carefully so as not to frighten her further. "They are gone," he said quietly, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. The woman's head snapped up, and for the first time, Yates got a clear look at her face. She was younger than he had expected, probably around 20, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her face. Her eyes, a striking green even dulled by fear and exhaustion, fixed on him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Dirt and bruises marked her skin, but beneath the grime she was beautiful in a way that made his breath catch. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, madam," Yates said, crouching down several feet away from her to appear less threatening. "I am going to help you." He pulled his hunting knife from his belt and she flinched. "I am just going to cut those ropes," he explained, moving slowly. "Is that all right?" She nodded, extending her bound wrists toward him. He took her hands gently in his, and even through the rough calluses on his palms, he could feel how cold her skin was despite the heat of the day. She was going into shock. The ropes had been tied cruelly tight, cutting into her flesh, leaving angry red welts and dried blood. Anger surged through him again at the thought of what she had endured. He slid the blade carefully under the ropes and cut through them with one swift motion. The moment her hands were free, she tried to pull them back, but Yates wrapped his large hands around hers, stopping her. "Wait," he said gently. "Let me look at these." "I am fine," she said, but her voice shook. "You're not fine," he replied, his tone firm but kind. "The ropes cut deep. If these get infected out here, you could lose your hands." She stopped struggling and let him examine her wrists. The damage was worse than he had thought. The ropes had been on for hours, maybe longer, and the skin was raw and bleeding in places. He reached into his pack and pulled out a cloth in his canteen. "This might sting," he warned before carefully cleaning the wounds. She hissed in pain but did not pull away. Her eyes stayed fixed on his face, studying him. "Who are you?" she asked. "Name is Yates Crawford," he said, wrapping her wrists carefully with clean cloth torn from his spare shirt. "I have a camp about 3 miles north of here. You need water, food, and rest. Why did you help me?" He looked up at her, meeting her gaze directly. "Because it was the right thing to do." "Most people do not do the right thing," she said bitterly. "I am not most people," Yates replied. "Can you walk?" She tried to stand, but her legs gave out immediately. Yates caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms encircling her easily. She weighed almost nothing, and he realized with growing concern that she was severely dehydrated and probably had not eaten in days. "I am going to carry you," he said. "Do not fight me on this. You will not make it 3 miles on foot in your condition." "I do not even know you," she protested weakly. "My name is Yates Crawford. I'm 26 years old. I live in these mountains, hunt and trap for a living, and occasionally guide travelers through the passes. I fought for the Union during the war, was honorably discharged in 1865, and I have not hurt another human being since, unless they tried to hurt me first. That is more than those men who left you here told you about themselves, I would wager." Despite everything, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Zelda Fletcher," she said, 20 years old. "I was a seamstress in Winnemucca until 3 days ago when I saw something I should not have seen." "We can talk about that later," Yates said, adjusting her in his arms. She weighed so little it frightened him. "Right now we need to get you somewhere safe." He carried her through the desert landscape as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The terrain was brutal, rocky and uneven, but his legs were strong from years of mountain living, and he did not slow his pace. Zelda drifted in and out of consciousness against his chest, and each time she woke with a start, he spoke quietly to her, telling her where they were, reassuring her that she was safe. By the time they reached his camp, darkness had fallen, and the temperature had dropped dramatically as it always did in the Nevada desert. His camp was nestled in a sheltered area between 2 large rock formations, with a lean-to structure he had built from pine branches and a fire pit ringed with stones. It was not much, but it was home, and more importantly, it was hidden from anyone passing through the area. Yates laid Zelda down on his bedroll near the fire pit and quickly worked to get a fire going. Once the flames were crackling, he heated water in his battered tin pot and mixed in some dried herbs from his supplies. The broth was thin, but it would help restore her strength without overwhelming her system. "Drink this," he said, helping her sit up and holding the cup to her lips. "Slowly." She sipped the warm liquid, and color began to return to her face. After she had drunk half the cup, she pushed his hand away gently. "Thank you," she said. "I need to tell you what happened. Those men, they work for Silas Garrett. He owns half of Winnemucca, including the saloon, the general store, and most of the land around it. 3 nights ago I was working late at the dress shop. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, had gone home, but I stayed to finish a wedding dress. I heard voices in the alley behind the shop, and when I looked out, I saw Mr. Garrett and his men beating someone. They beat him until he stopped moving, and then they dragged him away. Yates listened intently, his expression grave. Did they see you? Not at first, Zelda continued, her hands trembling as she clutched the cup. I tried to be quiet, but I knocked over a spool of thread, and it rolled across the floor. The noise made them look up, and Mr. Garrett saw me in the window. He pointed right at me. I ran, but where could I go? Winnemucca is not big enough to hide in, and Mr. Garrett controls everything. I tried to leave town the next morning, but his men caught me before I made it to the stage stop. They have been dragging me around for 2 days, trying to figure out what to do with me. I think they finally decided to leave me out here to die of thirst rather than shoot me, because that would be harder to explain. The man they killed, did you recognize him? I think it was Charlie Brennan. He was a drifter who had been in town for about a week. I heard he owed Mr. Garrett money for gambling debts. Yates shook his head. Garrett is a cancer in this territory. Everyone knows it, but no one has been able to prove anything. The marshal in Winnemucca is on his payroll. Then what can I do? Zelda asked, despair creeping into her voice. I cannot go back there. He will kill me. You are not going back, Yates said firmly. Not until we figure out how to handle this safely. We? She asked, looking at him with surprise. You think I am going to help you this far and then just leave you to fend for yourself? Yates said, a hint of warmth in his voice. You can stay here as long as you need to. These mountains are big enough that no one will find you if they do not know where to look, and those men do not strike me as the type to go tracking through rough country for longer than a day or two. I cannot just stay here indefinitely, Zelda protested. I have no supplies, no money. I lost everything when they took me. We will work it out, Yates said. Right now, you need to rest. You have been through hell, and your body needs time to recover. He stood and moved to the lean-to, pulling out his spare blanket. When he returned, he draped it carefully over her. Where will you sleep? She asked. I will keep the fire going and keep watch, he replied, in case those men get brave and decide to come back. You need rest, too, Zelda said, but her eyes were already drooping. I have gone longer without sleep, Yates assured her. Close your eyes, Zelda Fletcher. You are safe here. She wanted to argue more, but exhaustion won out. Within moments, her breathing deepened, and she fell into the first real sleep she had had in days. Yates sat by the fire, his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness beyond the circle of light. He thought about what Zelda had told him, about Silas Garrett and his men. Yates had encountered Garrett before, 2 years ago, when the man had tried to claim mineral rights to part of the mountain range where Yates trapped. The dispute had nearly come to violence before the territorial government had ruled in Yates's favor. Garrett was the kind of man who never forgot a slight, and Yates suspected the man would be none too pleased to learn that someone had interfered with his plans tonight. But as Yates looked at Zelda sleeping peacefully by the fire, her face relaxed for the first time since he had seen her. He knew he had made the right choice. He had spent 8 years alone in these mountains, telling himself he preferred solitude to the complications that came with caring about people. Yet in the span of a few hours, this woman had awakened something in him that he thought had died during the war. It was not just protective instinct, though that was certainly part of it. There was something else, something in the way she had looked at him with those green eyes, the way she had trusted him despite having every reason not to trust any man after what she had been through. The night passed slowly, filled with the sounds of the desert coming alive in the darkness. Coyotes called in the distance, and somewhere a night bird sang. Yates kept the fire burning and his vigil steady. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Zelda stirred. "Good morning," Yates said quietly, not wanting to startle her. "How do you feel?" She sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "Like I was dragged behind a horse for 2 days," she said, but there was a hint of humor in her voice that had not been there the night before. "But better than yesterday. Thank you for watching over me." "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I had any right to, considering," Zelda replied. She looked down at her bandaged wrists, flexing her fingers carefully. "These feel better too." You're good at this. I have patched myself up enough times to know the basics, Yates said. He stood and stretched, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun. I'm going to make some coffee and breakfast. Are you hungry? Starving, Zelda admitted. I have not eaten since the morning they took me. Yates prepared a simple meal of coffee, bacon, and cornbread from his supplies. It was plain fare, but Zelda ate like it was a feast, and Yates found himself smiling at her enthusiasm. When they had finished, he cleaned up while she sat by the fire, watching him work. Yates, she said finally, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. He turned to face her, giving her his full attention. All right. Why are you really doing this? Helping me, I mean. You could have just scared those men off and left me to find my own way. Instead, you brought me to your camp, used your supplies on me, and stayed up all night keeping watch. Most people would not do that for a stranger, especially not out here where survival is hard enough without taking on someone else's problems. Yates was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. During the war, he began, I saw a lot of things that made me lose faith in humanity. I saw men kill each other over nothing, saw towns burned, families destroyed. When it was over, I came out here because I did not want to be around people anymore. I thought if I isolated myself, I would not have to witness that kind of cruelty again. But last night, when I saw those men treating you like you were nothing, like your life did not matter, something inside me could not just walk away. Maybe it was because I have been alone too long and forgot what it means to be part of the human race. Or maybe it was because when I looked at you, I saw someone who deserved better than what this world was giving her. Either way, I could not leave you there. That is the honest truth. Zelda's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me, she whispered. It is just the truth, Yates said, feeling awkward under the weight of her gratitude. Tell me about your life here, Zelda said, clearly wanting to change the subject before she started crying. How did a man end up living alone in the mountains for 8 years? Yates settled back against a rock and began to talk. He told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about joining the army because he had nowhere else to go. He spoke of the war, though he kept the worst details to himself, and about his decision to head west when it was over. He described his first year in the mountains, learning through trial and error how to survive, nearly dying more than once before he figured out the rhythms of the land. He talked about the animals he hunted, the trap lines he ran, the occasional trips to Winnemucca to sell furs and buy supplies. It sounds lonely, Zelda observed. It is, Yates admitted, but it is also peaceful. No one out here is trying to kill me or tell me what to do. I answer to no one but myself and the mountain. Do you ever miss being around people? Sometimes, he said, especially in the winter when the snow gets deep and I do not see another soul for months. But then I remember what people are capable of, and the loneliness does not seem so bad. Not all people are bad, Zelda said gently. Look at you. You are proof of that. Yates did not know how to respond to that, so he stood and began gathering his trapping gear. I need to check my trap lines today, he said. Will you be all right here by yourself for a few hours? Zelda looked around the camp, then back at him. I think so. But Yates, what if those men come back? He walked to the lean-to and pulled out an old revolver. Do you know how to use one of these? My father taught me before he died, Zelda said, taking the gun and checking the chamber with surprising competence. Good. Keep it close. If anyone other than me comes into this camp, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understood? Understood, Zelda said, and the determination in her voice told him she meant it. Yates left her there, though every instinct screamed at him not to. He forced himself to focus on checking his traps, but his mind kept drifting back to the camp, to Zelda. He found himself hurrying through his work, taking less care than usual because he wanted to get back to her. When he finally returned in the early afternoon, his arms full of rabbits and a string of fish from the creek, he found Zelda had not been idle. She had tidied up the camp, reorganized his supplies, and even washed their breakfast dishes in the small spring nearby. You did not have to do all this, Yates said, dropping his catch near the fire pit. I could not just sit here doing nothing, Zelda replied. Besides, I wanted to feel useful. You have done so much for me. This is the least I could do." They worked together to prepare the rabbits for dinner, and Yates found himself enjoying her company in a way he had not expected. She had a quick wit and was not afraid to tease him gently about his rather Spartan living conditions. He found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years. As they ate dinner that evening, Zelda told him about her own life. She'd grown up in Kansas, lost both parents to cholera when she was 17, and had made her way west working as a seamstress in various towns. She'd been in Winnemucca for nearly a year, saving money in hopes of eventually making it to San Francisco. "I wanted to open my own dress shop," she said, staring into the fire. "I had almost saved enough for the journey and to rent a small space, but now all that money is gone. Mr. Garrett's men took everything when they kidnapped me." "You will get to San Francisco," Yates said with conviction. "Once this business with Garrett is settled, I will make sure of it." "How?" Zelda asked. "He owns the town, Yates. The marshal will not help. Even if I went to the territorial authorities, it would be my word against his, and I am just a seamstress while he is a wealthy businessman." "There has to be a way," Yates insisted. "Men like Garrett always make mistakes. We just need to find his." They talked late into the night, brainstorming ideas. Finally, exhaustion caught up with both of them, and Yates insisted Zelda take his bedroll again while he stretched out on the ground near the fire with just his coat for a blanket. "This is not fair to you," Zelda protested. "You should take your own bed." "I have slept in worse places than this," Yates assured her. "Besides, I am used to it." "Then at least share the bedroll," Zelda said, her cheeks flushing slightly in the firelight. "It is big enough for two if we do not mind being close, and it is getting cold at night." Yates hesitated, propriety warring with practicality. Finally, practicality won. "All right," he agreed, "but only because you are right about the cold." They lay down together on the bedroll, maintaining a respectful distance at first. But as the night grew colder and the fire died down, they unconsciously moved closer together, seeking warmth. Yates woke sometime in the darkest part of the night to find Zelda curled against his side, her head resting on his chest, one hand clutching his shirt. His arm had wrapped around her protectively in his sleep. He knew he should move, should put proper distance between them, but he could not bring himself to do it. She felt right there, like she belonged in his arms, and that realization both terrified and exhilarated him. The days began to fall into a comfortable rhythm. Yates would check his trap lines and hunt while Zelda maintained the camp and prepared their meals. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing. Yates found himself opening up to her in ways he had not opened up to anyone since before the war. She told him about her dreams and fears, about the life she hoped to build someday. The more time they spent together, the more Yates realized he was falling for her, and the more that terrified him. One week after he had rescued her, they were working together to tan a deer hide when Zelda suddenly spoke up. "I cannot hide up here forever," she said quietly. Yates's hands stilled on the hide. "I know," he admitted. "Sooner or later I have to go back down there and face this situation, but I am scared, Yates. I'm so scared of what will happen." He set down his tools and moved to sit beside her. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said fiercely. "I promise you that." "You cannot make that promise," Zelda said, but she reached out and took his hand anyway. "Mr. Garrett has too much power and too many men." "Then we need to find someone with more power," Yates said. "What about the territorial marshal? He is based out of Carson City, and he is not on Garrett's payroll." "It is a 4-day ride to Carson City," Zelda pointed out, "and we would still need proof of what happened. My testimony alone will not be enough." "What if we could find the body of the man they killed? Charlie Brennan, you said his name was?" Zelda's eyes widened. "You think we could?" "If they killed him in town, they had to get rid of the body somewhere close by. Garrett would not want to travel far with a corpse. We could search the area around Winnemucca, see if we can find where they dumped him." "That is dangerous," Zelda said. "If Garrett's men catch us—" "They will not," Yates interrupted. "We will be careful. We will scout at night, stay hidden. I know every inch of the terrain around Winnemucca. If Brennan is out there, I will find him." Over the next 2 days, they planned their approach. Yates drew maps in the dirt showing Zelda the layout of the land around Winnemucca and identifying the most likely spots where someone might dispose of a body. They waited for a moonless night, then made their way down from the mountains under cover of darkness. Winnemucca lay quiet in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings and dim lights that seemed small and insignificant against the vast Nevada landscape. Yates and Zelda circled wide around the town, avoiding the main roads. They searched ravines and abandoned mine shafts, any place where a body might be hidden from casual observation. They were about to give up when Zelda grabbed Yates's arm and pointed toward an old well about half a mile from town. The well had been marked as dry and dangerous with a crude warning sign, and wooden boards had been placed across the top. "That well," Zelda whispered. "I remember hearing Mr. Garrett talking about it once. He said it was over 100 feet deep and too dangerous to use. If you wanted to hide something permanently, that would be the place." Yates approached the well carefully, his skin prickling with unease. Someone had recently disturbed the boards covering it. When he moved them aside and lowered a rope with a lantern attached, the light revealed the grim truth. A body lay at the bottom of the well, crumpled and broken. It is him," Zelda confirmed, though she could not look for long. "That is Charlie Brennan. I recognize his jacket." "We need to get the territorial marshal," Yates said grimly, replacing the boards. "This is evidence that even Garrett cannot talk his way around." They made their way back to the mountains and spent the next day preparing for the journey to Carson City. It was risky leaving the safety of the high country, but they had no choice. They set out at dawn the following morning, pushing hard and covering as much ground as possible before nightfall. The journey to Carson City took 3.5 days of hard riding. Yates had used some of his savings to buy a horse for Zelda in a small settlement along the way, and though she was not an experienced rider, she kept up without complaint. They slept under the stars, and each night Yates held her close, telling himself it was just for warmth even as he knew it was becoming something more. When they finally reached Carson City, they went straight to the territorial marshal's office. Marshal Thomas Bridger was a stern man in his 50s with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his life upholding the law in a lawless land. He listened carefully as Zelda told her story, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Silas Garrett," Bridger said when she finished, shaking his head. "I have suspected that man of a dozen crimes over the years, but he is always too careful to leave evidence. You are sure about what you saw?" "I am certain," Zelda said firmly. "And we found Charlie Brennan's body. He is in the old dry well half a mile northeast of Winnemucca." "That is substantial evidence," Bridger said, "but I have to warn you both. Going after a man like Garrett is dangerous. He has money and influence, and he will fight this with everything he has." "I understand," Zelda said, "but I cannot let him get away with murder, and I cannot spend the rest of my life hiding in the mountains, no matter how peaceful it is there." Bridger's eyes flicked to Yates, a knowing look crossing his face. "You are the mountain man, Yates Crawford. I have heard of you. You have a reputation for keeping to yourself." "That was before," Yates said simply, his hand finding Zelda's under the table. "I see," Bridger said, a slight smile tugging at his mouth. "Well then, let us go bring Mr. Garrett to justice." Marshal Bridger assembled a small posse of deputies he knew he could trust, and they rode hard for Winnemucca. When they arrived, they went first to the well to retrieve Charlie Brennan's body. It was grim work, but the evidence was undeniable. With the body as proof and Zelda's eyewitness testimony, Bridger confronted Silas Garrett at his saloon. Garrett was a large man with slicked back hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the rough frontier town. His face went pale when he saw Marshal Bridger walk through the door with Zelda Fletcher at his side. "Silas Garrett," Bridger announced in a voice that carried through the entire saloon, "you are under arrest for the murder of Charlie Brennan and the attempted murder of Zelda Fletcher." "This is ridiculous," Garrett blustered. "That woman is a liar. She stole from me, and I have witnesses who will testify to it." "We will let a judge and jury decide that," Bridger said. "But first, you are coming with me. And do not bother calling for your men. My deputies have already arrested the 4 who took Miss Fletcher into the desert. They were quite willing to talk once they realized the alternative was hanging as accessories to murder." The color drained completely from Garrett's face. He looked around the saloon as if hoping for help, but everyone avoided his eyes. The carefully constructed empire of fear and intimidation was crumbling around him. The arrest of Silas Garrett sent shockwaves through Winnemucca. Once people realized he could no longer hurt them, witnesses began coming forward with stories of extortion, theft, assault, and worse. The depth of Garrett's corruption was staggering. The trial, held in Carson City to ensure impartiality, lasted 2 weeks. Zelda testified with courage and clarity, never wavering despite the defense attorney's attempts to discredit her. Yates sat in the gallery every day, his presence a silent source of strength for her. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Silas Garrett guilty of murder. He was sentenced to hang, and his empire in Winnemucca was dismantled. The 4 men who had dragged Zelda into the desert received prison sentences for attempted murder and kidnapping. After the trial, Zelda and Yates stood outside the courthouse in Carson City, breathing in the fresh air of freedom and justice served. "It is over," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. "It is really over." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You were so brave in there," he said. "I'm so proud of you." She pulled back to look up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "What do you want to happen?" Yates asked, his heart pounding. "I do not know," Zelda admitted. "Everything I planned before, going to San Francisco, opening a dress shop, it all seems different now. The things I thought I wanted, I'm not sure they matter as much anymore." "Why is that?" Yates pressed, though he thought he knew the answer. "Because of you," Zelda said simply. "Because somewhere between you cutting those ropes off my wrists and wrapping your hands around mine, between learning to trust you and learning to care for you, I fell in love with you, Yates Crawford. And now I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Yates felt like all the air had left his lungs. "Zelda, I have nothing to offer you. I live in a camp in the mountains. I make barely enough from trapping to keep myself fed and supplied. You deserve so much more than that." "I deserve to be with someone who makes me happy," Zelda countered. "Someone who makes me feel safe and valued and loved. Someone who was willing to risk his life to save mine without even knowing who I was. You gave me all of that, Yates. You gave me everything that matters." "I love you too," Yates said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "God help me, I have loved you since that first night when you fell asleep by my fire." "But Zelda, are you sure? Life in the mountains is hard. It is lonely and dangerous, and—" She cut him off by pulling his head down and kissing him. It was their first kiss, and it was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I am sure," Zelda said firmly. "I do not need a fancy dress shop or city life. I need you. We can build a life together in those mountains. It will not be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." "We could build a real cabin," Yates said, his mind already racing ahead. "Something solid that would last through the winters. I've been setting aside money for years with nothing to spend it on. We could make a real home up there." "I can sew," Zelda added, excitement growing in her voice. "We could sell my work in Winnemucca along with your furs. Between the two of us, we would do just fine." "Are you absolutely certain?" Yates asked one more time, needing to hear it again. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Zelda said. "Marry me, Yates Crawford." He laughed, the sound filled with pure joy. "I think I'm supposed to be the one asking that question." "Then ask," Zelda challenged. Yates dropped to one knee right there on the street in front of the courthouse, taking her hand in both of his. "Zelda Fletcher, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and build a life with me in the mountains and put up with my terrible cooking and long silences and all the challenges that come with loving a man who has forgotten how to live among civilized people?" "Yes," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of happiness. "Yes to all of it, forever, yes." They were married 3 days later in Carson City by a circuit preacher. Marshall Bridger served as their witness, along with the owner of the boarding house where they had been staying. Zelda wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself from fabric, purchased with some of the reward money the territorial government had given her for her testimony against Garrett. Yates had his hair trimmed and wore new clothes for the occasion, though he felt uncomfortable in anything fancier than his usual buckskins. None of that mattered when they stood before the preacher and exchanged vows. Yates's voice was strong and steady as he promised to love and protect Zelda for the rest of his life. Zelda's voice was clear and sure as she promised to stand by his side through whatever challenges lay ahead. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, and for the first time, Yates was grateful for 4 walls and a real bed. He made love to his wife slowly and carefully, overwhelmed by the trust she placed in him and determined to make this night memorable for all the right reasons. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, talking quietly about their future and the life they would build together. "I never thought I would find this," Yates admitted, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "After the war, I was convinced I was too damaged to love anyone or be loved in return." "You are not damaged," Zelda said firmly, turning to face him. "You are strong and good and kind. The war changed you, but it did not break you. You just needed someone to remind you that you still had a heart worth giving." "And you are that someone," Yates said, kissing her forehead. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." They stayed in Carson City for another week, purchasing supplies they would need to build a proper cabin. Yates bought tools and nails and glass for windows. Zelda bought fabric and thread, cooking supplies, and everything else they would need to turn a mountain camp into a home. They also purchased books, something Yates had not owned in years, because Zelda insisted that long winter nights needed to be filled with more than just staring at the fire. The journey back to the mountains took 4 days, as they were now traveling with 2 pack horses laden with supplies in addition to their riding horses. They took their time, stopping early each day to make camp and spend their evenings as newlyweds should, learning every detail about each other and reveling in the joy of their union. When they finally reached Yates's old campsite, Zelda looked around with fresh eyes. "We are going to need more space," she observed. "I know," Yates agreed. "I was thinking we could build about a 1/4 mile from here, where that flat area is near the good spring. The location is more protected from wind, and the spring never runs dry even in the driest summers." They spent the rest of that day exploring the area and planning where exactly to build. Yates paced out the dimensions of the cabin while Zelda gathered stones for what would become their fireplace. By the time darkness fell, they had a plan and a new excitement for the work ahead. The next morning, they began in earnest. Yates cut trees and hauled logs while Zelda stripped the bark and prepared the wood. It was backbreaking work, but they labored side by side, and somehow that made it easier. In the evenings, exhausted and covered in pine sap and dirt, they would collapse together by the fire, and Yates would hold his wife close and marvel at how his life had changed. "Are you happy?" he asked her one night after they had been working for about 2 weeks. "Deliriously," Zelda replied, kissing his jaw. "My back aches. I have splinters in places I did not know I could get splinters, and I am pretty sure I smell like a lumberjack, but I have never been happier in my entire life." "You smell like pine trees and fresh air," Yates said, "and you are beautiful." "You are biased because you love me," Zelda teased. "True," Yates agreed, "but that does not make it any less accurate." It took them nearly 3 months to complete the cabin, working through the late summer and into early fall. The structure was solid, with thick log walls chinked with mud and moss, a strong roof covered in split shingles, real glass windows that let in light, and a stone fireplace large enough to heat the entire space. Inside, Yates built a bed frame, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves for their supplies and books. Zelda sewed curtains for the windows and made quilts for the bed from fabric scraps. She also insisted on a small area being partitioned off with a curtain for privacy, which Yates thought was adorable given they were married and there was no one else around to see them. When the cabin was finally finished, they stood outside, admiring their work. The September sun was warm on their faces, and aspens on the surrounding slopes were beginning to turn gold. "It is perfect," Zelda said, leaning against her husband's solid frame. "It is home," Yates corrected. "Our home." They carried Zelda over the threshold that night, both of them laughing at the absurdity of the formal gesture in such a rustic setting. But once inside, with a fire crackling in their new fireplace and the smell of fresh pine filling the air, the laughter faded into something deeper and more profound. They made love in their own bed, in their own home, and Zelda cried afterward because she was so overwhelmed with happiness. "What is wrong?" Yates asked in alarm. "Nothing is wrong," Zelda said, laughing through her tears. "Everything is so right it almost hurts. 5 months ago I thought I was going to die in the desert. Now I'm married to the most wonderful man I've ever known, and we have built a beautiful home together. Sometimes blessings are so big they overflow." Yates held her close, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I feel the same way." As fall deepened into winter, they settled into their new life. Yates continued trapping, but now he had Zelda to help him process the furs. She proved to have a talent for preparing the pelts, and her neat stitching meant they could command higher prices in Winnemucca. Zelda also began sewing items to sell, shirts and dresses, and mended items for the townspeople who were slowly beginning to rebuild their community now that Garrett's shadow was gone. Once a month, Yates and Zelda would make the long trip down to Winnemucca to sell their goods and buy supplies. The town treated them as heroes, the couple who had brought down Silas Garrett and freed them from his tyranny. People went out of their way to do business with them, and more than one shopkeeper refused to accept full payment for goods, insisting on giving them a discount out of gratitude. The first winter in the cabin was hard, but not unbearable. The walls they had built kept out the worst of the cold, and the fireplace never failed them. Snow drifted deep around their home, sometimes trapping them inside for days at a time, but they did not mind. They read books aloud to each other, played cards, made love, and talked about everything under the sun. Yates taught Zelda how to skin rabbits and prepare wild game. Zelda taught Yates how to read more difficult literature and appreciate poetry. They grew closer with each passing day, learning the rhythms of each other's minds and hearts. When spring finally came, melting the snow and bringing wildflowers to the mountain meadows, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not been certain until she missed her third monthly cycle. She told Yates one evening as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Yates looked at her, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension, and then to pure, unadulterated joy. "A baby?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "A baby!" Zelda confirmed, smiling at the wonder on his face. "We are going to be parents, Yates." He pulled her into his arms so tightly she squeaked in protest. "Sorry," he said, loosening his grip but not letting go. "I just cannot believe it. We are going to have a child." "Are you happy?" Zelda asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Yates said. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful, and a dozen other things I do not have words for. A child. Zelda. Our child." Over the following months, Yates became even more protective than usual, constantly worrying about Zelda's health and safety. He insisted she rest more, work less, eat more. Zelda found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from a place of love. He had lost so much in his life, and now he had something precious to protect. "I am not made of glass," Zelda reminded him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a bucket of water from the spring. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am perfectly capable of doing normal tasks." "I know," Yates said, taking the bucket from her anyway. "But humor me. Let me take care of you." "You always take care of me," Zelda said softly. "You have from the very beginning." As her pregnancy progressed, they made preparations for the birth. Yates rode down to Winnemucca and convinced the town doctor to come up to the cabin a month before the baby was due, offering to pay him handsomely to stay with them until after the birth. Dr. Harrison was an older man who had delivered hundreds of babies in his career, and his presence eased much of Yates's anxiety. On a cold November night, with the first snow of the season falling gently outside, Zelda went into labor. Yates paced the cabin like a caged animal, while Dr. Harrison attended to his wife. The sound of Zelda's pain nearly drove him mad, and more than once he tried to burst into the partitioned area where she labored. "Mr. Crawford," Dr. Harrison said firmly, blocking his way. "Your wife is doing fine. This is a normal part of childbirth. The best thing you can do for her right now is stay out here and let me do my job." "Let him in," Zelda called out between contractions. "I want my husband with me." Dr. Harrison sighed but stepped aside. Yates immediately went to Zelda's side, taking her hand. She gripped it so hard he thought she might break his fingers, but he did not complain. He wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, whispered encouragement, and let her squeeze his hand as hard as she needed to. After several hours of labor, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, their son was born. The baby's first cry filled the cabin, and Yates felt tears streaming down his face. Dr. Harrison cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket before placing him in Zelda's arms. "He is perfect," Zelda whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Look at him, Yates. Look at our son." Yates looked down at the tiny red-faced infant in his wife's arms and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving his little fists in the air as if protesting his sudden eviction from the warm darkness of the womb. "He is so small," Yates said in wonder, carefully touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby immediately grasped it, and Yates's tears fell faster. "He is holding my finger." "What should we name him?" Zelda asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Yates knew exactly what his name should be. "James," he said, "after your father, James Fletcher Crawford." Zelda's eyes filled with tears. Her father had been a kind and gentle man, taken too soon by disease, and she had missed him terribly. "James," she repeated. "Yes, that is perfect. Hello, little James. Welcome to the world." Dr. Harrison stayed with them for another week to ensure both mother and baby were healthy before making his way back down to Winnemucca with Yates's heartfelt thanks and a generous payment for his services. Once he was gone, it was just the three of them, a family alone in the mountains. Those first months with a newborn were exhausting. James was a healthy baby with healthy lungs, and he made his needs known loudly and frequently. Yates and Zelda took turns walking him around the cabin in the middle of the night, soothing him when he cried, marveling at every little sound he made and every new expression that crossed his tiny face. "I never knew I could be this tired and this happy at the same time," Zelda said one morning as they sat together at the table, both running on very little sleep. James was finally napping peacefully in the cradle Yates had built. "He is worth it," Yates said, looking over at his sleeping son with an expression of such tender love that it made Zelda's heart ache. "He is," she agreed, "and he's lucky to have you as a father." "I hope I can be the kind of father he deserves," Yates said. "I never had much of an example to follow. My own father died when I was so young." "You will be wonderful," Zelda assured him. "You are already wonderful. The way you hold him, the way you look at him, anyone can see how much you love him." As James grew from a newborn into an infant and then a toddler, the cabin in the mountains became filled with laughter and life. Yates continued his trapping, but he adjusted his schedule so he was never gone for more than a few hours at a time. He could not bear to be away from his family for long. Zelda continued sewing, but she did most of her work while James napped or in the evenings after he went to bed. They made it work, juggling the demands of survival in the wilderness with the demands of raising a child, and somehow their love for each other only grew stronger through the challenges. When James was 2 years old, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time she knew the signs immediately, and she told Yates the news without any dramatic build-up. "We are having another baby," she announced one morning over breakfast. Yates nearly choked on his coffee. "Another one? Already?" "Babies happen when married people share a bed," Zelda said with a laugh. "You should not be so surprised." "I'm not surprised, just overwhelmed," Yates said, but he was grinning. "James is going to be a big brother." Their daughter was born the following spring, and they named her Sarah after Yates's mother. She was a calm, sweet baby, the complete opposite of her loud, energetic brother. James was fascinated by his little sister and insisted on helping with everything, from changing her cloth diapers to singing her lullabies he made up himself. With 2 children, the cabin felt smaller, but Yates immediately began planning an addition. Over the next year, working in every spare moment he could find, he built on 2 more rooms, one for the children to share and one that could serve as Zelda's sewing room and a general gathering space. Life fell into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. Yates would wake before dawn and check his trap lines or hunt while Zelda got the children fed and dressed. They would spend the mornings working together, Yates on outdoor tasks and Zelda on indoor ones, while the children played nearby. Afternoons were for the children, with Yates teaching James how to track animals and identify plants, while Zelda taught both children their letters and numbers. Evenings were family time, with stories around the fire and songs before bed. Once or twice a year, they would make the trip down to Winnemucca as a family. The town continued to thrive without Garrett's influence, and people always made a fuss over the Crawford children. James loved the attention, while Sarah hid behind her mother's skirts, peeking out shyly at the strangers who cooed over her. On one such trip, when James was 5 and Sarah was 3, they ran into Marshall Bridger, who was passing through town on official business. "Yates Crawford," Bridger said warmly, shaking his hand. "And Mrs. Crawford, you are looking well." "We are doing very well," Zelda said, bouncing Sarah on her hip while James clung to his father's leg. "Life in the mountains agrees with us." "I can see that," Bridger said, smiling at the children. "You have built yourself quite a life up there. Not many people could do what you have done, survive and thrive in such isolation." "We are not really isolated," Yates said, and for the first time in his life, he truly meant it. "We have everything we need right here," he added, his arm around Zelda and his hand resting on James's head. "That you do," Bridger agreed. "That you do." The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons, winters with snow drifts higher than the cabin windows and cozy nights by the fire, springs with wildflowers and baby animals and the hard work of planting their garden, summers with long days and the children running wild through the meadows, autumns with the aspens turning gold and the work of preparing for another winter. Through it all, Yates and Zelda's love for each other only deepened. When James was 10 and Sarah was 8, they had one more child, another son they named Thomas. By this time, James was old enough to help his father with the trap lines, and he took to mountain life with natural enthusiasm. Sarah preferred to stay close to her mother, learning to sew with the same skill and precision that Zelda possessed. Thomas was still a baby, but he watched everything with wide, curious eyes, and Yates knew he would soon be running after his older siblings. One evening, when all 3 children were finally asleep, and Yates and Zelda sat together on the porch they had built onto the front of the cabin, Zelda rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The life we chose? Sometimes I wonder if the children would have been better off in a town, with more people around, more opportunities." Yates was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "I do not regret a single day," he finally said. "Our children are growing up knowing how to survive, how to work hard, how to appreciate the beauty of the natural world. They are learning values that people in towns often forget. And most importantly, they are growing up in a home filled with love that is worth more than any opportunity a town could provide." "They are happy," Zelda agreed, "and so am I. Some days I can hardly believe this is my life, that I went from thinking I was going to die in the desert to this, to you and our children and this beautiful place we call home." "It still amazes me that you chose this," Yates said. "You could have had that dress shop in San Francisco. You could have had an easier life." "I chose you," Zelda said simply, "and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. You are my home, Yates Crawford. You always have been, from the moment you cut those ropes off my wrists and wrapped your hands around mine." Yates kissed her then, soft and sweet, tasting of coffee and contentment. "I love you," he said, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too," Zelda replied, "forever and always." As they sat together watching the stars come out over their mountain home, Yates reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had been a broken man, hiding in the wilderness from a world he no longer understood or trusted. Then one day, he had heard horses thundering through a canyon and had made the choice to get involved, to help a stranger, to be something more than just a man surviving in the mountains. That choice had changed everything. It had brought Zelda into his life, and she had taught him that love was not a weakness but a strength. She had shown him that being vulnerable enough to let someone in was not something to fear but something to celebrate. Together, they had built not just a cabin but a life, not just a family but a legacy. Their children would grow up strong and capable, knowing they were loved beyond measure. They would learn the lessons of the mountain, the importance of hard work and self-reliance and respect for the land. But they would also learn about love, about partnership, about building something lasting with another person. They would see it demonstrated every day in the way their parents looked at each other, spoke to each other, supported each other through every challenge. Years continued to pass, and the children grew. James became a young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same dark hair and quiet intensity. He had his mother's green eyes, though, and her quick wit. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman, skilled with a needle and thread, but also capable of shooting a rifle and tracking a deer through the forest. Thomas, the youngest, was still finding his way, but he had his father's love for the mountains and his mother's kind heart. When James was 20 and announced he wanted to marry a girl he had met during one of their trips to Winnemucca, Yates felt the circle completing itself. His son was a man now, ready to build his own life and family. The wedding was held at the cabin, with half the town of Winnemucca making the journey up the mountain to celebrate. It was the most people that had ever been to their home at once, and Yates felt overwhelmed by the community they had built without even realizing it. After the wedding, as guests mingled and ate and celebrated, Yates found Zelda standing a little apart from the crowd, watching everything with tears in her eyes. "Happy tears?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "The happiest," she confirmed. "I was just thinking about how far we have come. When you found me in that desert, I had nothing. I had lost everything. And now, look at all this. Look at what we built together." "You gave me everything," Yates said. "You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. Everything good in my life started the day I cut those ropes off your wrists. And everything good in my life started when you wrapped your hands around mine," Zelda replied. "When you showed me that not all men were cruel, that some were capable of great kindness and love. You saved my life that day, Yates, in more ways than one." They stood together, watching their son dance with his new wife, watching Sarah laugh with her friends, watching Thomas chase the younger children around the yard. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the same colors Yates had watched 1,000 times from this same spot. But tonight, it felt different, more significant, like a benediction on the life they had built. "We did good," Yates said quietly. "We did better than good," Zelda corrected. "We did something beautiful." As darkness fell and the celebration continued around them, Yates pulled his wife close and kissed her forehead. They had been married for over 20 years now, had weathered countless storms, both literal and figurative, had raised 3 children in one of the harshest environments imaginable, and through it all, their love had never wavered. If anything, it had grown stronger, deeper, more resilient. The mountain man, who had once preferred solitude to human connection, had found his place in the world, and it was right here, with this woman in his arms and the family they had created surrounding them. The seamstress who had once dreamed of a dress shop in San Francisco had discovered that her real dream was not a place or a business, but a person and the life they built together. Years later, when Yates and Zelda were both old, their hair gray and their bodies slower, but their love as strong as ever, they would sit on that same porch and watch their grandchildren play in the meadow. They would tell stories about the old days, about how they met, about building the cabin, about raising their children in the wilderness. The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, asking for the story to be told again and again, never tiring of hearing about the day Grandpa saved Grandma from bad men in the desert. "Tell us about the ropes," the youngest grandchild would always demand. "Tell us about when you cut Grandma free." And Yates would smile and take Zelda's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers just as they had that first day when he had cut away her bonds and wrapped his hands around hers in a gesture of comfort and protection that had grown into something far more profound. "I saw ropes around her wrists," Yates would begin, his voice still strong despite his age. "I cut them free and wrapped my hands around hers, and in that moment, though I did not know it yet, I found the other half of my soul. Everything that came after, all the joy and love and family, it all started there, with that simple act of choosing to help someone in need. And I found my home," Zelda would add, squeezing his hand. "Not a place made of wood and stone, though we built a beautiful one of those too. I found my home in him, in us, in the life we chose together." The grandchildren would sigh with satisfaction, the same way children always do when a story ends exactly as it should, with love triumphant and a happily ever after that was real and true and earned through years of dedication and devotion. When Yates was 73 and Zelda was 67, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hand in hers, in the bed they had shared for nearly 5 decades. Zelda mourned deeply, but she also celebrated the incredible life they had lived together. She remained in the cabin for another 3 years, surrounded by family, until she too passed away on a crisp autumn morning with leaves of gold drifting past the windows. They were buried together on a hillside overlooking the cabin, under a tall pine tree where they had often sat together in the evenings. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to honor them, sharing stories and memories that would be passed down through generations. The cabin remained in the family, carefully maintained as a tribute to the love story that had begun there, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful lives are built not in cities or towns, but in the wild places, by two people who choose each other again and again, every single day. The story of Yates and Zelda Crawford became legend in Winnemucca and the surrounding territory. It was a story about courage and kindness, about second chances, and choosing love even when it is scary and uncertain. It was a story about a mountain man who saw ropes around a woman's wrists and chose to cut them free, and in doing so, freed himself from the loneliness and pain he had been carrying for so long. It was a story about a woman who trusted a stranger in her darkest moment and found not just safety, but a love that would sustain her through a lifetime. But most of all, it was a story about how sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, in the most unlikely places, two souls can find each other and build something lasting and true, something that transcends the hardships of frontier life, the dangers of living in the wilderness, the countless challenges that threaten to tear people apart. They built a love that endured, that grew stronger with each passing year, that created ripples extending far beyond their own lives into the lives of everyone they touched. And it all began with a simple act of compassion, a mountain man cutting ropes from a captive woman's wrists and wrapping his hands around hers, a gesture that said without words, "You are not alone. I will protect you. I will help you. You are safe now." From that moment of connection, everything else flowed, a life lived fully and deeply, a love story for the ages, and a legacy that would inspire generations to come. In the end, that is what love is. Choosing to reach out when it would be easier to turn away, choosing to stay when leaving would be simpler, choosing to build together when facing life alone would require less effort. Yates and Zelda chose each other every day for nearly 50 years, and in doing so, they proved that true love is not just a feeling, but a decision, made over and over again to honor and cherish and protect the person who holds your heart. Their story serves as a reminder that heroism does not always look like charging into battle or performing great feats of strength. Sometimes heroism looks like cutting ropes off a stranger's wrists. Sometimes it looks like trusting someone when you have every reason not to. Sometimes it looks like building a cabin in the mountains, or sewing by firelight, or raising children in the wilderness. Sometimes it looks like simply holding someone's hand and promising, through actions if not always words, to face whatever comes next together. The mountains where they lived still stand, eternal and unchanging, witness to countless love stories and tragedies and triumphs. But among all the stories those mountains could tell, few would be as beautiful or as true as the story of Yates and Zelda Crawford, the mountain man and the seamstress who found each other in the harsh Nevada desert in 1873 and built a love that would last beyond their lifetimes, echoing through the generations as a testament to the power of choosing kindness, choosing courage, and above all, choosing love.